Our utility, Eskom, says that it is experiencing unplanned energy supply constraints, which have resulted in rolling blackouts that could continue throughout this week. And following up on its announcement in December 2021 to lease parcels of its land in Mpumalanga, the state utility has now also issued a request for proposals to independent power producers for the development of renewable electricity generation sites for additional capacity. And this opens the environment for IPPs to develop their own power generation plants for own consumption or for sale to third parties. Energy expert Matthew Cruz joins us now to unpack some of these options as more consumers are considering alternative options for supply of power. Matthew, thanks so much for being with us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just start by just quickly taking a look at the latest round of rolling blackouts. And Eskom again, nothing new really in the story, in the narrative as it is unfolding, except that there are concerns that, you know, when the new plants are also behaving as the old plants, where do we go to from here?
Great, yes, thanks for that. And just to clarify, the blackouts and the load shedding that's scheduled, Eskom has given us a forecast of about 61 days for the next 6 months. That equals about every 3 days, as according to Suntime and PwC, of load shedding every 3 days. So there's going to be a need for consumers, if they can, to see if they can get an alternative option for their house so they don't experience load shedding.
So if we look at what's happening at the moment with regard to Eskom and now, you know, once again trying to get energy onto the grid from various other avenues, government has been promising the South African consumer more affordable, reliable and sustainable energy for quite some time now as part, of course, of our development. But looking at what's happening now with the public-private partnership kind of arrangement that's playing out, how is this in the interest of the consumer at the moment?
Great, yes. Well, what Eskom's trying to do is they're trying to get power onto the grid quickly, and that's cheap. And the power that's going to come onto the grid will come onto the grid in about a year and a half, 2 years. So it won't really affect load shedding right now with this public-private partnership that's happening. And in addition, the power that's going to come onto the grid is going to be solar power. So it will contribute to the grid during the day, but our peak demands in the morning and in the evening. So it's not going to really, in my opinion, change too much in terms of the price of electricity or load shedding, because we're still going to have to fire our diesel generators to cover the peak demand that happens in the morning and the evening. So we at Home Energy, we advise consumers to go alternative routes to become immune from load shedding.
You know, Matthew, it seems a bit like Groundhog Day all the time, because not so long ago, a few years ago, we were talking about this very issue, and the fact that IPPs would be asked to come online so that they could supply more energy to the grid. And then I remember it was very shortly after the election of President Cyril Ramaphosa as president of the African National Congress, there was an agreement signed by Eskom with IPPs, 27 of them, if I remember correctly. And what has happened to that? Because we are now a few years down the line. Where's the relief that was supposed to bring?
So the relief comes in that these IPPs, when they come online, the solar plants and the wind plants, the power is there, but the power gets provided during the middle of the day. And so we're not really going to be covering our peak demand, to mention again, by all of these renewables that are coming online. And yeah, the result is that as the old power stations get taken off the grid as they age and they get decommissioned, this coal power that's coming off the grid is going to be needing to be replaced to cover the demand in the evenings when people are cooking and using their geysers, using kettles, and in the mornings when they're waking up and making their meals. So yeah, from my side, I don't see any reprieve actually. And what I've been saying for the past year is that we will be having load shedding for the next 5 years, and then the price of electricity will double in the next 5 years as well.
And I think this is perhaps, what gets South Africans upset, because you'll remember when Andre de Ruyter came in, it was said, okay, another 18 months and then, we should have this thing under control. And yet we keep hearing the same story over and over and over again. And from what you've just outlined, why should South Africans believe anything coming out of Eskom at the moment as it pertains to the power cuts and the end thereof especially?
Why should we believe Eskom? Well, I was in Eskom for 10 years, and the last 2.5 years I was a management consultant to the board, and I advise on what's going on in Eskom and what to do in the future. And I can say that Andre has been doing a good job, and Eskom is on an upward trajectory in terms of what they're doing to stop load shedding and curb the increase of price of electricity. However, the last 12 years have seen a lot of negative things take place in the power sector during the previous era, and with the previous presidents, and that destruction that took place will need to be replaced and compensated for over the next 5 years. So there was a lot that was done. We've stopped the bleeding, I believe, in Eskom, and we're starting to make improvements with some of these PPPs that are coming in, these private partner partnerships, partnerships with private sector. And there's going to be a turnaround in about 5 to 8 years. But unfortunately, until then, there's still going to be an increase in the price of electricity and load shedding. So consumers are going to find alternatives for now.
Well, where should consumers find alternatives? Because unless your pockets are well lined, what are your alternatives?
So that's a good question, and I'd like to address the pockets are well lined aspect of that. So we at Home Energy we advise for customers to get a solar and battery installation at their house, and not a lot of consumers know that you can get financing for your installations on either your bond or through a rent-to-own model. So as you save electricity, save money on the electricity costs that you would be paying. An example being, if you're spending 2,000 Rand a month on your electricity bill, then getting a solar and battery installation, you can cut that electricity bill down to about 400 Rand. But the finance on that would then be about 1,800 Rand, 2,000 Rand. So you end up paying about 300 Rand more, but you're immune to load shedding. So, and you can get financing for that. Alternatively, you can start off small with just a battery installation that will see you through load shedding, the 4 hours of load shedding, and then get recharged again like a battery when the power comes back. And that'll be about 80,000 Rand for an installation, which can also be financed. So there are financing options. So you don't need to have a whole lot of money up front to pay for a system that would be about 180,000 Rand to cover 90% of your electricity costs.
The only problem with that, Matthew, is that most South Africans do not have 18,000 Rand to spend on alternative sources of energy right now. People are queuing for 350 social relief of distress grants. Where they're going to find 18,000 Rand from?
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate repercussion of all of the things that have taken place, is that as the price of electricity rise, the people hardest hit are the people that are on the social grants and they don't have the money available to pay for these escalating electricity prices. There is also advice I can offer about going towards gas appliances and becoming as little reliant on Eskom as possible in your home, and having alternative sources of heat, for instance, during the winter times. And I wish I could have a better story for you, but we don't, unfortunately. This is the case we find ourselves in.
And I think the problem with that, the alternatives that you're putting forward, Matthew, it doesn't solve the problem at all, because, as I said, that speaks to people who actually have means, whose pockets are somewhat lined already, or who are able to access credit to do that. Yes. And unfortunately, the majority of people who are affected by Eskom and the load shedding do not have that. Those who are able to do that are already doing it. They've already done it. They are already, installing or have installed these solar panels and everything else in their homes. So the problem that we we have is what happens to the poorest of the poor in this country, and also those who are just cash-strapped and cannot afford anything else. But I also want to talk to you about, from the state's standpoint, from the perspective of the government, what other viable options are there that have been presented by the Departments of Mineral Resources for assisting Eskom to create less dependence on state power utilities?
So I'd just like to clarify one of the things that you were talking about with the poorest getting affected. First of all, people have not actually taken the route of going and getting solar and battery installations in their house. About 2% of the households in South Africa that could get it have not. And as they do that, they actually take themselves off the grid in terms of the load that they're putting on the power grid. So as the homes start to get solar and battery installations, they actually assist in reducing load shedding because they don't represent a load anymore to the system. So homes that are now only 2% full in terms of getting installations, if they got 90% installations, for instance, and we had maybe 1 million homes that had these systems on their house, then we wouldn't have the load that we see, and then we'd be able to cover the load that we are seeing. In terms of other things that we can do, there is some really interesting, cool advances that are happening in America and Europe where neighborhoods themselves are funding being able to provide power for themselves. So all of the homes that get batteries, they can then choose to contribute their batteries to the other homes in their neighborhood when there's load shedding. And this is called a virtual power plant system or a smart grid system or that kind of system, which is controlled by the private sector, where power is now, even though load shedding is happening, getting delivered to homes from other homes that have contributed towards that energy with their battery installations. So there's some things that are going on like that, which are really cool that we're seeing, where the private sector is then compensating for what's going on in the public sector, for instance.
And about the auctioning of land surrounding Eskom's power stations in Mpumalanga, that of course now available to private investors for renewable energy generation. We know that Eskom is hoping that there could be a quick turnaround in developing these plants, but is that 18 to 24-month estimate realistic?
So yeah, I think is it realistic? It would be more 24 months to 36 months, first of all. As all of the things get sorted out in terms of how it's going to work and all of the contracts are signed and all the red tape is taken out the way. And yeah, as I said, when those plants come online, once again, they're only providing power during the middle of the day, those big solar plants, because they don't have battery installations really that go with them. When there's a big solar farm, they're just like mostly solar panels with maybe a small little battery. But that battery won't be able to shift that power that's produced to provide the power to the grid in the evenings or the mornings. So even though they're making efforts towards going renewable and getting these big solar farms and renewables onto the grid, I don't see that actually really making a difference. So let's say that the ultimate happens and there's infinite resources, and in 18 months there's what they want, 4,000 megawatts put onto the grid, 40 installations around the country. Even if there's 40 installations, those 4,000 megawatts are coming on in the middle of the day, and they're not actually going to cover the peaks, which is the morning and evening. So I don't see this as an actual effective solution that's going to solve load shedding and the increasing cost of electricity in South Africa, unfortunately.
Matthew, all of this, it just leaves one exasperated, just thinking of how we're going through this again and hoping for a different outcome once again. But we look at NERSA as well, the National Energy Regulator. In September, they approved the issuing of generation licenses to 7 preferred bidders. Now, when will those start to contribute to solutions in alleviating the problem that we have?
So yeah, they'll come online 2022, 2023, 2024. And what's nice about the emergency power procurement program that took place is that there is generation sources on there that will contribute towards the peak demand. So it's not a popular example, but the car power ship diesel ships, that's one example, or a open cycle gas turbine, a turbine that fires diesel that's an IPP. those will actually contribute towards load shedding decreasing. However, they won't contribute towards the price of electricity decreasing, because diesel costs about 10 times the price of coal and solar to produce power. So there is going to be some reprieve, I see, in the future, maybe from 3 years on from now in load shedding. But yeah, with the price of electricity, until we've gone through the unbundling process and there's an open market in about 5 to 8 years, I don't see that coming down, unfortunately.
And even then, what guarantee do we have that prices will in fact come down?
This is true. This is true. We don't have any guarantee. Yeah, and this is why we continuously advise Home Energy to go independent and become immune from load shedding by getting a solar and battery installation. And yeah, there is many options available. You can start off small, it's modular, you can get financing, and yeah, just go. I recommend for consumers to go out into the marketplace, see what is available, educate yourselves about the options that are open to you. You can get free quotes online. So if you visit Home Energy, HOHM, you can get a custom quotes according to where you live, and you'll see there, okay, I can go either battery option, medium option, or premium option, and then you can see the financial options from there. So, you know, educate yourself about the alternatives, because I don't think we can rely on Eskom.
We can't rely on Eskom, and yet Eskom is this huge albatross around the neck of South Africa and the South African fiscus in particular. So, you know, it sounds like an easy solution, but it isn't. And, yes, you know, the question is, of course, fixing Eskom in the short to medium term, one would imagine. And you were extolling Andre de Ruyter's praises earlier on with regard to how Eskom has fared. But the reality is, and I was speaking to Ted Blom yesterday and looking at information from the CSIR in terms of how South Africa has looked in terms of load shedding, and we have fared worst under de Ruyter's term. So if they are fixing anything, what are they fixing? Why aren't they getting it right?
Yeah, great. Thanks for pointing that out. The praise should actually be going towards Cyril Ramaphosa. I love the man. As the president, I like him. And I saw in Eskom, when he came into power, he put in to place Pakamani as the CEO, and then immediately a third of the executives got fired that were connected to the previous presidency. So I saw the change happening. I saw the stopping of the bleeding. I saw the starting to focus on maintenance and correct procedure. And I saw the betterment that Eskom's going towards. And you know, this is why I sing his praises, as was one way I put it. I don't sing his praises. I think he's making good decisions. I think Pakamani also made good decisions. I think Cyril is making good decisions. Unfortunately, the trajectory that we're going on, you know, we made a nice rise and a peak about 12 years ago in terms of our economy and energy generation. And then as about 12 years ago, something happened. You had the debt of Eskom, you had the decline of the energy sector, and then you had the bottoming out as Pakamani comes in. We stopped the rot, as we put it, when Cyril came in, and now we're starting to go on an up trajectory. But right here where we are, there is load shedding and this price increases. So there is betterment that's coming. But yeah, it takes a long time to turn around a big ship like Eskom.
What's a long time? And this is part of my consternation. Don't say to the public you're going to do this in 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 years, when in fact you have no idea of the enormity of the task at hand, because all that leads to is a trust deficit between the public and, of course, those making the promises.
Yeah, that's very that's very good. That's very pertinent. So the trust deficit is there because continuously we've been saying it's only load shedding for the next 3 weeks. It's only load shedding. It's going to stop. It's going to stop. It's going to stop. But we've seen over the last 8 years it hasn't been stopping. So I think a better tact would be more realistic. Give better projections instead of just 6 month projections and saying 61 days, which we haven't had before. We haven't had such a long forecast before of like, oh, there's actually going to be load shedding during winter, over the whole of winter. Give us a 2-year projection. What is going to happen to the price of electricity in 5 years' time? Give us some more certainty about where things are going in the future so that we can actually make informed decisions right now. That's what I can recommend. It's like kind of, instead of just looking at the short term when you're communicating through the media, communicate long term. What is it realistically that we're actually looking at in South Africa with our energy sector?
Well, Matthew, we'll leave it there for this morning. Energy expert Matthew Cruz talking about alternative sources of energy as Eskom buckles under the pressure once more. Let's take a quick break before the 7 o'clock news.